All right, everyone, I think we're going to get underway. Hello again, my name is Bruce Sellery, and I am the president of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed, in particular, the charcuterie board, which was a whole taste sensation. Thank you, Mitchell. I'd also like to welcome our youth and young leaders who are here from Ryerson's Food and Nutrition program, supported by the Canadian Club of Toronto. Where are you? Where are the Ryerson folks? Big wave. Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. You are our future, so thank you in advance. We are also grateful to our sponsor, CG Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management, Pinkowski Group, represented today by Cary Pinkowski. Thank you very much for your sponsorship, Cary. We appreciate it. And to the Very Good Bushers for providing that charcuterie today. A little round of applause for them as well. Beautiful. Plant-based protein is having a moment. It's a big moment. Celebrities have been on this for years, but this past January, in case you didn't see it, the Golden Globe Awards meal was entirely vegan. There is also a website called Vegan Disney World that covers the many, many options on offer at those theme parks. And if you don't happen to be Leonardo DiCaprio or Mickey Mouse, it is helpful to know that A&W Restaurants has a whole selection of things that they're rolling out, including the Beyond Meat Burger. So what is next? How big will this market get? Is the appetite for passion fruit carpaccio and jackfruit stew sustainable? And how are Canadian companies positioned to profit from all this growth? Today, our panelists are going to answer these questions and many more. Let me introduce the panel. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois is a professor in food distribution and policy at Dalhousie University in Halifax. He is also the scientific director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab there. And before Dal, he was affiliated with the University of Guelph's Arrel Food Institute, in which he co-founded. Known as the food professor, his research focuses on food distribution, security, and safety. And Sylvain, when I first read that, it read to me like food processor instead of food professor, so I'm going to endeavor to have it be correct. You could. Candice Hutchings is the author of the cookbook, The Edgy Veg, 138 carnivore-approved vegan recipes. She delivers vegan recipes with attitude and more than a touch of comedy. Edgy by nature, both her popular YouTube channel and Instagram pages has disrupted the vegan community with her candid and humorous take on activism. Perry Pinkowski is the portfolio manager and investment advisor at Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. He has over 25 years of experience with North American and European capital markets. A leader and innovator in the Canadian equity arena, Cary prides himself as an early adopter on major investment trends, including that old thing called the internet, gold, energy, cannabis, and now food technology. Johann Tergesen is a 20-year veteran of the plant-based food industry. He co-founded Burcon NutraScience Corporation in 1999 and has helped establish Merit Functional Foods, which is building the world's first commercial canola protein production facility. He also has a lifelong passion for the environment and a deep knowledge of the plant-based food economy. Moderating today's conversation is Susan Krasinski-Robertson. She covers the retail industry for Report on Business at the Globe and Mail. She's worked as a freelance reporter and contributed to the Ottawa Citizen, the Montreal Gazette, as well as CBC Radio's Dispatches and Search Engine. Susan and panelists, I am very pleased to turn the Canadian Club of Toronto podium over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, everyone. So as Bruce mentioned in the introduction, this is a space where it feels like we can't go a day without some news breaking. So there was the Starbucks news yesterday, which came out of their sustainability announcement last month, where they said they were going to invest more in plant-based menu items. So Canada is the first place where we're seeing that start to move. Today we saw Wendy's announce that they've actually developed their own plant-based burger. They've developed that in-house, which is a different approach than other quick-service restaurant chains, which have invested in either Impossible Foods Burger or Beyond Meat's Burger, primarily. We've seen a lot of movement. We've seen the Disney announcement announcing Impossible Foods as their preferred plant-based meat provider. So there's a lot of movement in this space right now. It makes it a very timely moment to have this conversation. I thought before we got started, that was a great introduction. But I also wanted to give the audience a bit more of a sense of our panelists' experience in this space. So I'm wondering if we can start out, if you can tell us a little bit about how long you have all been watching the plant-based space or involved in or invested in the plant-based space, and a little bit about your history with this topic. Do you want to go first?
Sure. My background started in this space in 2014. So I've attended TED Global in Vancouver since that time, and there's a lot of leaders from Silicon Valley that come up to Vancouver, and they're really on the forefront, really, of investing. And they invited me to the Obvious Ventures party, January 2015, and met a number of the players, and they were backing Miyoko Cheese, the same group with the second largest investors in Beyond Meat. And for me, it was like a curiosity, like what this group typically invests in social media companies, tech companies, but all of a sudden they're in food tech, and this is 5 years ago. So I've been following it ever since and watching their investments the whole way. So it's not a fad, or it's not a couple-month thing here. So.
Sylvain?
Yeah, I've been doing research in agri-food for 20 years. So I've looked at proteins for 20 years. But really, to be honest, I've only looked at plant-based proteins for perhaps maybe 5 years. So I look at this plant-based phenomena, as Bruce said, but also look at how, where this disruption is coming from. And let's be honest, it's coming from the outside of ag. A lot of it comes from outside of ag, Silicon Valley and so on, which is actually not a bad thing. So I look at that phenomena, but also look in the inside of ag and look at how stakeholders that we all know feel threatened, really threatened by what's going on. And they're scared, absolutely.
Hi guys, I'm Candice. I've been vegan for about 10 years and just kind of fell into this as a career. 10 years ago when I went vegan, we didn't have such a global conversation about plant-based proteins or plant-based meats. So I started my career by actually creating family favorite recipes I grew up with that we didn't have on the market. I mean, we didn't have, really Silk or Beyond Meat, any of this stuff available. So you had to make everything from home. So that's what I do now. I have a YouTube channel and a blog where I teach people how to make their favorite recipes, just a plant-based option. I kind of cater to the reducitarian, the flexitarian, if you will, not just the vegan community, to just, kind of encourage everyone to reduce their carbon footprint by choosing a plant-based option.
And I'm Johann. I'm CEO of Burcon NutraScience, and have been in this industry, I guess, over 20 years now. We started 21 years ago with a technology that was unproven at the time to extract protein from canola meal. That was our single and sole purpose at the time. We were very naive, didn't know really, to be honest, what we were getting into. What has happened is that there have been a couple of trends that have carried us forward. First was the health and wellness trend, and then most recently there's been really an incredible surge in interest in plant-based protein. I don't have a scientific background, but 20 years now spent in a company doing science technology with respect to essentially the chemistry of food. I feel like now I have a PhD in the space.
Candice, I want to start with you with a question. So you were talking about marketing this to everybody. And so you're vegan yourself, but you are really marketing plant-based menu options to flexitarians, to the mass market. How does that change your approach as a cookbook author and a chef?
Well, I really try to have conversations with these people. I mean, the vegans and the vegetarians, I already have them. Mm-hmm. They don't need to be marketed to, they don't need to be preached to. But neither does anyone else. I think if you just approach it, I always say that my activism is led with a fork. So just, kind of tying into those nostalgic foods and really get the glands salivating, if you will, showing that you can still have mac and cheese and lasagna just with a plant-based option that's just as delicious and probably will make you feel better, and whether it's in your tummy or also make you feel better because you're doing something great for the environment or your health. So I would say my main audience, which is what I think with a lot of these fast food chains that are coming out with a plant-based burger, it's not really for the vegans or the vegetarians. It's more for the person that's curious. I call them veg-curious people that just want to feel good about something, or maybe they didn't really like meat growing up and they didn't know that there was another option.
Or they're aware of some of the issues that have come out around
Exactly.
sustainability and health.
I mean, that's the huge conversation now, is a lot of people aren't turning because they a lot of the time isn't because of the animals that they're choosing a plant-based life. It's because they want to make a global impact, and they're very aware of climate change, global warming, and they want to do something. And sometimes, it is easy just to do it with the food that you eat because it's such a huge industry and we make such an impact that way.
It's so interesting because you're in such glitzy company, as we were talking about before. I mean, Bruce mentioned the Golden Globes. I was talking about how Natalie Portman was on the Oscars red carpet talking about if you could just reduce the amount of meat meals you eat every week. So this is really something that's coming into the pop culture conversation too. And Johann, I actually wanted to ask you about that because we were talking about the pricing of the Beyond Meat IPO. And how some of what was missed there might have been the appeal of these products to non-strict vegetarians and vegans.
Yeah, what I would say, the following on that point, what I would say is that it's also stratified. It depends actually on whether you're talking about boomers or Gen X, Y, Z, or millennials, et cetera. I've seen some really high quality research by one of the largest food and beverage companies in the world where they were presenting to us. And what they were showing is that if you were to ask a baby boomer why they would consider the product, they're probably going to cite health reasons. But if you ask kids who are my children's age, they're all university age, it's much more going to have to do with climate. And or animal welfare issues, et cetera, and maybe only secondly, health and wellness issues. And I say that in part, one of the questions that quite often gets pointed at me, people will say, well, hey, the products that your proteins are gonna go into, they're no healthier than beef. And then my response to them is, yeah, but there's so many consumers out there who would say, you mean I can eat a product that's just as healthy as beef, but save the planet and have the feel good about the fact that no animals were involved in the production. So it's an interesting market and one that's complex and hard to understand where these trends are coming from, but they're coming fast.
It is fascinating too because the health aspect is something that's been a bit of a controversial talking point, right? The main criticism of a lot of these plant-based foods has been, but they're extremely heavily processed, which is true.
Right.
Right, it is true, and we all should be attempting to eat fewer heavily processed foods. So I want to throw that open to the group. What do we think that impact of the processed food conversation could have on the adoption of these kinds of foods?
I mean, if you're eating processed food anyway, what's the difference if you're eating it processed from an animal or processed and plant-based? I mean, you can't really compare, let's go with Beyond Meat, for example. You can't compare a Beyond Meat burger to, let's say, a salad. They're literally apples and oranges. They're not the same thing. So that argument, I think, sometimes comes just from a place of defensiveness. This is different. And many of us I'm averse to change a lot of the time. So you can't really compare the two. But if you compare it to an actual burger, I mean, then you have, it's just as processed as any other burger that you're going to get at any other fast food chain. Mm-hmm.
If I could respond, sorry, go ahead, Sylvain.
No, go ahead, Johann.
What I was going to say is that I had a conversation recently. In fact, I think it was at a cocktail function at the Four Seasons, and then someone was saying to me that very thing. Oh, but these foods are highly processed. Well, that's easy to say if, in fact, you're so wealthy that all your food at home is fresh fruits and vegetables, et cetera, and you have the time, et cetera, to deal with it. But in fact, the food industry has to be able to supply food that sits on store shelves, that is in trucks, et cetera, that people can grab and go. And in fact, the products that are processed the way we're processing them allow for a lot longer shelf life. Have you looked at what the shelf life is of oat milk? It's way longer than it is for cow's milk. And so a lot of these things actually have the promise of being better for I don't want to say the average consumer, but many, many, many more consumers. And it's a little bit snobby to say, oh, it's too processed. I like only fresh berries in the morning. Well, that's fine if you can afford that. But look at the 29 million people who live in Beijing. You can't have every one of them eating freshly delivered fruits and vegetables every single day. It's unrealistic.
I'm going to piggyback on that. I always say to people, processed food, GMO food, it feeds the world. You can definitely cater to a larger audience. You can get to those countries that don't have access to the fresh fruits and vegetables that we do. So I think it's when you're having that conversation, you can't just turn your nose up at processed food. There is a time and a place for it, for sure. Yeah.
And I think there is quite a market too for artisanal food, like lower processed plant-based foods. I know what Very Good Butchers is doing, so it's expanding rapidly.
Sylvain, you had a thought on that too.
I have a lot of thoughts, actually. So this is what I think. I think we're paying for Beyond Meat's legacy. First of all, Beyond Meat should have been Canadian, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
We missed out on that one. So kudos to Beyond Meat. They actually proven to the world that plant-based manufacturing is scalable. They did that less than a year ago. So we can thank them for that. The problem with their strategy, and I've always been concerned about that strategy, which leads to the conversation we're having today, all the confusion we have over health benefits, the environment, and all that. It's because of this infatuation of comparing the Beyond Meat product with beef.
Yeah.
As much as it's been going on for 11 years since they started in 2008, 2010. So we're paying for that right now.
Yeah.
So a lot of people out there are saying, well, it's healthier. Well, a steak is a steak. It's unprocessed. What's unhealthy about that? Well, look, and then on the environment, if you want to see confusion on the environment, whenever someone says, oh, plant-based is more environmentally friendly, where's the evidence? I can find tons of studies proving your point, but I can also find tons of studies proving another kind of point. So and that's unfortunate because there's a lot of confusion out there right now.
Absolutely. We also were talking about the boomers and the millennials. I think the instinct would be that the millennials are driving most of the growth of this. But is that accurate, or is that just a stereotype that it's the younger consumers who are the ones driving?
On the investment side, for sure.
Yeah?
Yeah, like I'm a big believer in following what millennials like to invest into. And actually, prior to millennials, you look at like Amazon.com 20 years ago, people were fighting that trend. Like most analysts were negative on that. You look at Tesla 5 years ago. My wife and I, we loved Teslas. We were probably too early in that, in the stock, right? But it was all retail driven. And with the whole Beyond Meat moving from $25 to $240, that was younger investors who loved the story, loved the space. So,
the Beyond Meat one is really interesting if you consider this. The investment banks that were involved in that, if I'm not mistaken, it was Chase. It was JP Morgan was one of the two that led it, and was it Goldman, I think, the other? These are two of the biggest, best investment banks in the world. They priced it at $25 and thought they were heroes, and they were so wrong. And I think that they were wrong because what they didn't understand, and I think the investors get it, is that people really want to feel better about their decision. They want to feel better, about their food decision, but they also want to feel better about their investment decision. And that's what they missed. And they're still missing it, I think.
That's where the millennials come in, is that, I mean, I'm one, and I think about every purchase that I make. I think about how, I mean, when you have to look at it from a larger scale, right? So it's not just, okay, I'm buying this thing. How is that dollar that I'm spending impacting not only myself, but the environment? And I think we like to invest in things that make us feel good and make us feel like we have a purpose. As millennials, I think a lot of us can get lost in the whole narrative of like, oh, we can't afford a house and blah 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 and avocado toast. But we like to feel like we have a purpose. We like to feel like we're here on this universe to make a change, and I think that that's where a lot of this is coming from as well.
The more you give choice to consumers, the more you can create social bridges between clusters in the marketplace. And so as soon as you got Beyond Meat out there, and I mentor startups in the plant-based space, and you actually allow people to dine together, stay together, because before, I mean, nobody was really talking to each other. So yes, the younger generations, I agree, that absolutely, they're really more influenced and they're buying more of these products. But we've also noticed that children of Xers or boomers are influencing the older generation as well with this new agenda, and they weren't exposed to that before. And if they want their kid to go home and eat with them, well, they got to make some changes. So.
Adapt or have a big fight
Exactly.
at the dinner table. Right? Well, and that's where what I do with my business is I do a lot of consulting for restaurants. And so I'll come in and I'll look at their menu and I'm like, okay, if you have 6 people that want to come eat at your restaurant or go out to eat and 2 of them are vegan or vegetarian,
you lose that business.
You lose that entire table because you don't have an option that is either A, there's either no option, or B, you don't have an option that's exciting for that person.
Yeah.
So I go in and I really analyze those menus. And I think that that's, again, like I said, adapt or die, right? Do you want to lose an entire group of people just because you are resistant to a change that is so disruptive right now? It just doesn't make sense.
And it's funny, we were talking about the slow-moving investment community, but Cary, there are also some normally slow-moving food companies that are starting to move on this, right? Cargill coming after Impossible and Beyond pretty hard, for example.
And going back to like the Tesla example, I think they might have learned their lesson, because like you saw Mercedes-Benz and BMW, they all thought they're going to take on Tesla by coming out with hybrid cars with, you know, classical combustible engines in there, and they all lost. You know, they rested too much on their laurels, where I think the food industry, the Cargills, are going, okay, we're not going to lose this battle, so they're coming in pretty aggressive here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a question from the audience. Actually, the generational question was one of them, but this is another one. Is there a conscious choice about pricing plant-based products as at or above the prices of their meat counterparts?
If I'm concerned about that. It's a good question. I don't know who asked the question, but it's a good one, because the economics of plant-based dieting at retail don't make sense to me right now. They're priced all over the place. They're placed all over the place in the grocery store. You have no idea where to find them. It is confusing the customer looking for that product. It's hard work right now. And once you get to that product, like $8 for 2 patties. And technically it should be the opposite. So I'm very happy of what's going on in Winnipeg with which I call the epicenter of protein manufacturing now in Canada, with all the investments, because we're going to need those investments to bring that price down.
Just to be clear, we don't want the prices to go down.
Margins.
Superficially cheap food. Which is why if I ask for soy milk at Starbucks, for example, I'm getting charged 60 cents more, right?
Yeah. But you want to democratize
it turns
choices.
people off.
You want to make sure that everyone can afford plant-based products.
And I mean, as you and I were talking about this over coffee, that the true price of food is a whole other discussion, and what we actually should be paying for food in terms of what it costs to produce it ethically and sustainably that's a whole other.
Well, and with subsidies, like other Candice was saying, the cost that we see, or the price that we see of dairy, is not the true price of dairy because of the subsidies, for example.
Right.
Got another question from the audience. What will be the biggest plant-based food trend, or I'm going to expand this question slightly to say non-meat-based food trend, because I know it's not always plant-based, coming up in the next year or two?
Lab-grown meat?
Yeah, I think it's
Talk to us about what that is.
I think it's going to be a real game changer over the next 2 to 5 years. There's a number of companies that say they're going to come to market in the next year, and if they do, it'll be 1% cultivated meat and 99% plant-based, but they can come to market and say we're first.
Can we actually define what we mean by lab-grown meat?
What it is, there's a company called Mosa Meats out of Holland that created the world's first call it hamburger in 2013, and Sergey Brin was a initial financier of that. So what it is, you can create the muscle, the fiber, the fat, put it all together, and really it comes down to cost. So that burger costs $250,000, and the biggest driver for it is growth media. So growth media last year is about $400 a liter. Supposedly they're getting it down to about $40 a liter, but we need to go down to about $1 a liter. But once we get it down to that cost, it's actually cleaner than real cow meat. It can last longer. There's no antibiotics in there. So I think that's going to be a real game changer. And also, you can do it for dairy right now, too.
Interesting.
The regulatory framework for that is going to be complicated in Canada. Given the heritage, given the baggage on the animal side, I got to tell you, this is going to be a battle.
It'll be Canada's loss, though, because
I'm not saying it's not a loss.
Because the Europeans or Singapore's got a real strong government initiative there.
But dairy in Canada, is sacred, and they're not going to go out quietly.
Not just sacred, but you talk about lobbying a well-financed
This is the advantage the
advocacy
Americans
group.
have. I mean, Americans can actually innovate. In ag, we don't understand what innovation means. That's why I love seeing capital outside of ag going into ag
Yeah.
to actually innovate.
I would respond to that same question slightly different. So on the question of what's the next big innovation, I would say in the nearer term, I totally agree on the cell-based meat, it's coming. But in the nearer term, what I believe you're going to see is that in the same way that Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat sort of cracked the code of being able to make a veggie burger taste much, much better and actually respond the way you expect it to, grill and flame up when you press on it and really essentially mimic it. I think we're going to see the same thing in the plant-based cheeses, in the plant-based ice creams, in the plant-based yogurts, et cetera. I'm not saying that what's out there right now isn't good. In some cases they are. In some cases they're actually quite disappointing. But I think that there is yet to come some real leaps and bounds in those products. And I say that with a level of confidence because I know that our company and other companies are working with major food and beverage companies, and they really want to push the envelope and make these products better. And they understand that in the end, the consumer is the king, and the consumer wants it to taste really good. Taste really good and be very pleasant.
But it doesn't mean, if it tastes good, doesn't mean that it tastes like something else that already exists.
Fair enough, fair enough. It's this, though. In the same way that 5 years ago, a veggie burger was a disappointment, typically, when you would barbecue one yourself and eat it, in the same way that game has been brought up, I'm just saying that the level of the quality of the products, so that people actually say, hey, have you tried? In the same way they're doing with the veggie burgers now, I'm expecting that to be the case for veggie-based yogurt, cheese, et cetera.
Yeah, I think cheese, there's so much room for growth there. And it is the one major barrier that I constantly hear from people that are like, I'm vegetarian, but not vegan because cheese.
Because cheese.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so much room for growth there because, I mean, there's a couple that are like, okay, yeah, it's okay, or it's decent, or I haven't had cheese in 10 years. So like, yeah, sure.
Sure, whatever.
Yeah.
But for a cheese eater, it's just not there. And somebody needs to crack that code.
To answer the question about what's going to be the biggest change or
Trend. Yeah.
I'm looking at farm gate a lot more, and I think gene editing is going to be a big one, which will make pulse growing, everything we grow out in fields much more efficient. And gene editing is basically just playing around with coding. It's not GMOs, it's just gene editing. It's a slight version of it. Hasn't been approved yet in Canada, but it's coming.
But the caveat
Will it
you
get
just
approved,
did
though?
there,
Like CRISPR-Cas9?
It's coming. That's what I heard.
the caveat you just did there, Sylvain, is so
If I
interesting
heard
to
it.
me because I think what you're talking about there is like, you're like, well, it's not GMOs. And I think the reason you
But
have to
you
give that
gotta
caveat is there's so much skepticism around whether food science has always brought good things to consumers, right? And does this trend have to fight against that a little bit?
So to not suffer from what has happened with GMO and the Frankenfood thing, transparency is a must, and I don't think there's enough of it. And that's why a lot of people were surprised that Beyond Meat had 27 ingredients and it was ultra-processed, and all of a sudden, oh my God, is this good? It's not so good. Transparency has to start now. But farmers will grow things they can make money with. If you don't have a product out in the field, you won't have a product on plates.
For sure, and farmers are big believers, like you said, in making money. And you know, if they could produce GM crops or gene-edited crops, like not one person has ever died from a GM process, but it's a marketing thing.
And
It really
everyone's
is.
scared of it because we never told, or we've never been transparent about it, and we're paying for it.
What market share do you see? This is a question from the audience again. What market share do you see for plant-based proteins in 5 to 10 years?
The numbers that we're looking at, the global meat and dairy industry is 1.7 trillion, and we feel it could capture 10%. And if you look at plant-based milks, it's probably about 13%. So that's a $170 billion potential industry. And if you just look at the cannabis market, you know, the bubble that just popped, but that's going to be a $70 billion by 2027. So this could be more than twice the size.
One stat from us at the lab, we expect that 16.5 million Canadians will have decided to either reduce the amount of meat they consume or eliminate meat from their diets by 2025. That's the number we have.
That said, Cary, you mentioned...
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's a lot of Canadian. That's a lot of Canada right there. Cary, you mentioned a bubble.
So when I
Talk about this. Sorry.
When I hear a fad, when someone say, "Oh, it's just a fad," I mean, they're not looking at our numbers.
So fad is one attack, bubble is another. People ask whether this is an investment bubble.
You can't have a bubble with two companies. Like really, it's BY. Yeah, BYD that the public can invest into Burcon. Impossible will probably go public the next few years. I'm sure there'll be some cultivated companies, but it hasn't even started.
While we're on the investor questions, another one from the audience. As a first-time investor in the space, what's the best way to get exposure to plant-based innovation in my portfolio?
The problem is there's a lack of companies. There's a real lack of supply. But I'm pretty sure in the next 12, 24 months, there'll be a lot more going public.
What role, one more from the audience, what role do you see for the alignment of subsidies and policies that recognize the cost of negative environmental externalities with respect to planetary and human health?
Must have been an economist asking that question.
I could feel that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, for decades, we've known that there's these, what economists call externalities, when some industry or some individual is producing a product that's at an expense to the society, but not direct expense to the company. And so this is absolutely an industry that is going to benefit from that. Because if you want to talk about what the cost is of beef production, my family is farmers back in Manitoba, and we had cattle, and I know that where the cattle were, no grass grew. You know what I mean? Like I understood that there was a little too much of the, the chemicals that were in the cow's urine, et cetera. It is simply the case that this is in fact capturing one of those economics where it's basically saying if you have an industry, whether it's plastics, single-use plastics, or in this case, an overuse of fertilizers or pesticides, et cetera, that's not being borne by the company, but that's being borne by the world, by the climate, and all of us in general, then there has to be some kind of mechanism to take that into account. And then that would show that, in fact, the price of beef is way higher than it currently is showing to be. And I don't know how we'll get to the answer, and it would be, it's a politically tough one to put forward. It's like carbon tax, but we're going to have to recognize it sometime.
Do you know why the government gave $1.8 billion to dairy farmers last fall? Politics.
Yeah.
So I have one question. If we want to make this, a political issue, who's the spokesperson for plant-based? Good luck.
Yeah.
With dairy farmers, it's the Dairy Farmers of Canada, and they have more power than anyone in agri-food right now, and that's going to last for a while. They got $1.8 billion they do not need. Vegans are paying for that $1.8 billion. Vegans believe dairy farming should be outlawed. This is what's going on in this country right now.
I'm really hoping that the whole conversation with climate change and the general citizen turning to their local politician to kind of push for different policies, I really hope that maybe that kind of takes some of that money and I don't know, inspires subsidies in other areas to make the world, a greener place. But I mean, those are rose-colored glasses, I think, right now.
It's possible.
It is possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
We just have to be louder.
We need more people in this room. That's what we need.
Exactly.
Yes.
We've seen at retail, we've seen some ups and downs with testing out plant-based options. So we saw at Burger King, the Whopper, the Impossible Whopper changed its price. We saw Tim Hortons introduce Beyond Meat in its breakfast sandwiches and then pull it from restaurants. What does that tell you about the evolution of these products and the evolution of how retailers are managing the customer demand?
I think right away it's poor execution. It's not, people, I think they're seeing it as a trend and trying to hop on right away without really thinking through, like, why did Tim Hortons add burgers?
With no grills.
With no grills.
Yeah.
No one was going to Tim Hortons for a burger, so why would they go for a plant-based burger? And I think the execution in a lot of these is just done rather poorly.
But they were going to Tim Hortons. They do go to Tim Hortons for breakfast sandwiches. So a Beyond Meat
But
sausage and a
proteins
breakfast sandwich seemed like a closer fit with what people are going there for.
But Tim
anyway.
Hortons is a warm-it-up place. That's what
Yeah.
they do, right? I don't know if everybody knows, but all the donuts at Tim Hortons are delivered there frozen in a truck.
My God.
It's not a restaurant.
Pearl clutching
A
moment.
place that warms them up, right?
Yeah.
And so I think
They showed up at 2 o'clock in the morning. You just
Start
killed
baking.
it for me.
But I have a fairly strong opinion with respect to, you're seeing an awareness about the particular news stories that appear negative, but I could list for you lots and lots of news stories extremely positive on plant-based. The CEO of Nestle, which is the largest food and beverage company in the world, who Burcon partnered with in the last month, he was out, the CEO just last week in their quarterly financial earnings call said that they are seeing double-digit growth accelerating actually in all of their plant-based products. They're so excited about it, they see it as being their future. I could also point to, nobody knows this company, but there's a little baked goods shop in the UK. It's not little, it's actually publicly listed. It's there, Tim Hortons, and it's called Greg's. And Greg's, G-E-R-G-G', makes a vegan sausage that they put on the menu last January. And that was pre-IPO of Beyond Meat. So this isn't when people were focusing on it. This was them doing it really ahead of the curve, let's call it their own product. It sold so well that they actually reported it in their results as part of the reason why they exceeded the analysts' estimates for their earnings. So you actually see
Morgan tearing it apart.
well, even still, what I'm saying is the actual consumers are actually walking into the store in the morning and saying, that's what I want, and buying it, and the sales are there. There's no question.
And here in Canada, you have Maple Leaf
Absolutely.
investing in this space as well. You want to talk about giants who are
Actually,
getting on board.
Maple Leaf story is pretty good because they've not only invested $300 million in Indiana on a plant-based, which should have been in Winnipeg, to be honest. Yeah. But anyways, that's another story. They actually changed the governance of their company. I mean, the way Michael McCain structured Maple Leaf now is very much focused on protein. And I got to tell you, I got to give a lot of credit to Michael McCain because the board is very pro-animal protein. I don't know how he did it, but and these are the things investors, leaders in the business world, they can't avoid it. They see it. Yeah.
Money talks. The numbers talk, right?
So how do we get the government to the table on this then? That's what's missing in this plan, like that piece of it clearly, in terms of.
It's not that they're not there entirely, because in fact Canada has, one of the super cluster programs is actually called Protein Industries Canada. Burcon in particular benefited from that. Our joint venture subsidiary received like $9.2 million from that. It's a pittance compared to the $1.8 billion that they're apparently.
And PIC has what, 19 projects funded so far?
Yeah. So there is funding.
There's investments.
Yeah.
It's just it's not as, I would say, visible. It's not as noisy. Yeah.
We have to wrap up, but I want to do a very, very quick lightning round before we do. Just a real quick one, if you can do it in as few words as possible. So I was a vegetarian. I'm not anymore. I'm a flexitarian now. So, very typical millennial adjacent person. And when I was a vegetarian, I didn't find veggie dogs and veggie burgers all that disappointing. They were fine. Maybe it had to do with the fact that I didn't eat meat all that often. But what has actually changed? We've come to this space where all of a sudden we're all talking about plant-based foods. We've had plant-based protein alternatives for ages. What has gotten better? What has actually changed about these foods from a technology standpoint, from a manufacturing standpoint? And how fast is it continuing to change and continuing to get better right now?
I think number one is taste. I think that stands apart.
And texture?
Yeah, because like 10, 15 years ago, this stuff was terrible.
I think accessibility. It wasn't really accessible. I remember growing up, my mother was vegetarian, so we had like the worst veggie dogs. Like they were from a can, they were awful. But she had to like go to like the local church and like buy them there, and this like van that came once a month, and now you can go to a normal grocery store and taste 12 different types of veggie dogs.
I'd say, I don't look at the supply side. I actually look at demand with social media. Everything's so amplified with social media. I mean, consumers have a voice, and what they're asking is choice. I think that's what happened.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would add, though, that I do believe that all of the really smart scientists and engineers, the food scientists, et cetera, they've been working on it for years, and there's so much capital at play right now, and so there are improvements being made, and products are getting better.
Thank you all for lending us your perspective today. What a fascinating conversation. Thank you all for joining us.
Good job.
Good job. Good try.
Cheers.
Oh.
I just want to, don't get up yet.
I want to have my dessert.
I know.
I just want to say thank you very much to everyone who joined us here today. This event is particularly close to my heart. I have a bit of a pet peeve. I'm a Gen Xer. Apparently, we don't exist. There's boomers and there's millennials, but nobody in between. And I was a vegetarian for many years, and then married an Italian who seems to eat salami every day. And this has always been a challenge in my family with the kids, and how do you impose and those discussions. And then my son actually this summer came home and said, "Mom, I want to be a pescatarian." And then earlier this week I came home and my husband of his own avail went out and bought Beyond Beef burgers. So the world is changing, and we represent three different demographics. So that really tells you, I think, where the world is going. And at the same time, I have to say, as a busy person, and I think this goes for a lot of us here, you do want to do something good. And when you don't have the time because you're working and you've got kids, if you feel that you can make a change just by the things you buy and how you behave on a day-to-day basis, it does make you feel good. So I really do. And actually doing this event personally makes me feel really good. And so good to see all you people out here. So I really want to thank everyone for coming out, and I really want to thank our panelists. This was a fascinating discussion, and I think really is telling about where this very, very important industry is going. And I think a lot of food for thought. So thanks so much for your time and sharing your thoughts with us. And lastly, I just want to say a thanks to the Very Good Butchers for sharing what was delicious charcuterie. I know that I will be ordering some to my home in Toronto for my next dinner party, so thank you very much. It was great. And lastly, I would also like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and BBC for live streaming today's event. Thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.